No. Wait, Michael. You cannot start speaking without telling us about that background. Welcome to the VC React podcast. Every week, we bring you insights and reactions from top VCs reacting to weekly news on startups, VC funds, and investment rounds. In today's episode, we will talk about pioneer VC funds in the MENA region and the different paths they took, the blended funding model that some VCs are adopting this year, the revolution of financing products in MENA, and the new tech IPO on the horizon in the UAE. We have a great episode for you today with three wonderful VCs. Khaled Talhouni, Managing Partner at Nuwa Capital, Michael Lints, Partner at Golden Gate Ventures, and Nour Tawfig, Investment Manager at MENA Investment. In the video description, you will find more details on our guests, their LinkedIn profiles, and links to their companies' websites. Our weekly news are brought to you by FWDstart, a twice-weekly newsletter that breaks down what's happening in the MENA startup, VC, and tech space. And as always, from FWDstart, we have my co-host, Jamie Lane. What's happening this week, Jamie?
Plenty this week. It's one of those weeks where we have so much that I see in the show notes that we've deferred a news item to next week, which is always indicative of how busy things are. But let's kick off on the VC side of things with Sawari Ventures. So this is a story that kind of first broke, if you will, kind of back in February time when it was kind of announced that it was going to be a 150 million fund on the horizon. It seems like that's been updated now to a 200 million target. So this is Sawari Ventures 2 fund targeting early 2025 kickoff for that. Of that 200 million, approximately 70% or $140 million is going to be allocated to Egyptian startups over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. In terms of stage focus, they're looking at Series A and Series B is going to be a portion reserved for seed stage investments as well. Some context and background about Sawari, founded back in 2010. So one of the OG VC firms that you alluded to there in the introduction, Ahmad. So they currently have 2 funds under management. So they have a $69 million Egypt-focused fund that closed in 2021. And they also have another $71 million fund that's focused on North Africa. They have backed over 30 companies, some standouts, I guess. You've Swivel, Money Fellows, Instabug. About 35% of the portfolio is dedicated to fintech. And noteworthy as well, obviously, is that they founded Flat Six Labs, who we're all aware of. So leading accelerators that was founded back in 2011. And obviously via that vehicle, they've backed somewhere in the region of about 500 startups to date. In terms of the focus of the new fund, as I mentioned, it's going to be 2 components. So one is going to be focusing exclusively on the Egyptian side of things. And then the remainder is going to be looking at supporting startups across Tunisia, Morocco, Kenya, and West Africa too. As I mentioned, fintech is kind of the primary focus, but as well as that, going to be targeting edtech, health tech, clean tech, and deep tech. So that's Sawari Ventures.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Sawari Ventures, as you mentioned, is one of the pioneers. They started in 2010. They are among the first 5 VC funds in the MENA region. And Sawari started with a dual structure fund. And it's very rare to see this. So Fund 1 is split into 2 main funds, one focused on Egypt and the other one is focused on North Africa. And now they're raising this $200 million fund as a dual structured fund as well. The first one will be targeting Egyptian LPs and investing in local Egyptian startups. The other one will be targeting international LPs, developmental LPs, focusing on North Africa. How do you see this dual fund structure playing out in practice? Why did they choose this structure? Is there any unique challenges or opportunities that they might face trying to balance those between local and international capital across different markets? What do you think?
So it's like local and international between Egypt, and then the rest is North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is primarily, I'm guessing, let me speculate, but like I'm assuming it's probably the LP base is heavily DFI driven, so development finance institutions. So, and I imagine there are different pockets for different geographies. And I think it's basically, you build it for that, for what the LP base wants. So I don't know, EIF or whatever, EBRD wants more North Africa, less Egypt, then okay, you create a different structure like for them. You have different also European initiatives for North Africa that may not extend to Egypt. So you slice and dice to do that. You could also do it because you want different teams incentivized differently, but that would be very unusual to kind of build it like that. But that's my highly speculative, like take on why. I mean, you're really chasing what the LPs want, especially for those geographies: Egypt, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, it's the preponderance of capital is DFI. I imagine is primarily like DFI driven.
Khaled, you mentioned the team. Can one team located in one area or city manage all that remotely? Or do they have to hire team members in different countries?
I imagine they have team members on the ground I imagine, yeah. You can, I mean, like, it's doable. There are lots of great examples globally of, investors kind of investing globally even, but without boots on the ground. The trouble with emerging markets, or our markets, not even emerging markets, like our markets, they're very context specific. And there's a lot of local knowledge that becomes more important, whether it's with the regulator or with, some of the founders' backgrounds and stuff like that. That's not as easy to unspool unless you're on the ground. So it's a bit harder. It's doable, but it's a bit harder. My personal preference is I like to have always somebody kind of on the ground if it's very different. Especially there's a lot of context switching between Sub-Saharan Africa and Egypt, for example. The good thing is they have flat six labs on the ground in most of those places, right? Like in North Africa, so that's helpful.
Nour, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would add is kind of...
No. Wait, Michael. You cannot start speaking without telling us about that background.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So this is my Gundam collection. I've been collecting Gundams since I can remember. But I'm a bit of a nerd, so I hand paint these things. It's fairly intense. Okay, I'll showcase it. So this is one of them that I'm building right now. So every single part, internal and external, is hand painted, and it's a great way to step away from VC for a few hours and kind of take a mental break.
It's kind of like your meditation.
It's my meditation, exactly. Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, please go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So what to chime in on Khaled's point, I agree that it's probably LP driven, which makes a lot of sense. I think it's from an opportunity standpoint, I totally get it. But I wanted to chime in on sort of local teams. So from an Asia context, our fund has offices in Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So within Asia, we've built local teams, and we saw the massive advantage. And even, I mean, Singapore, Indonesia is like an hour flight, right? So Jakarta, Singapore is a short flight, but it's a vastly different ecosystem in terms of maturity, infrastructure, types of founders, types of businesses you work with. So having that sort of local support on the ground, both from a sourcing aspect, just kind of being closer to whatever is happening. Sometimes you have these like small niche events that you just kind of want to be at, and it's easier if there's a team on the ground. But we've learned also from a portfolio support standpoint, it's just helpful to have these kind of local teams that understand the nuances of an Indonesian founder versus a founder in Vietnam. So I can imagine from their standpoint, apart from the LP aspect, just having these different teams is just very helpful from a portfolio construction standpoint as well.
Just to add in both Michael's and Khaled's points, right? So having worked in the North African market as well, I think it tends to, the need of having people on the ground is quite essential. But what I'm thinking out loud here, right? So this dual kind of structure, because I've seen a lot of funds or investment firms within the African region, right, working with DFIs, they tend to structure their fund differently. So it's not usually the 220 model, right? So usually DFIs come in and handle that kind of operational expenses from that kind of point of view. And then it makes it quite more, say, attractive for investors to just have a fund where they get to make, where the fund managers get to make 20% of the carry fees, right? So I think it's quite different right there in the region. And I think dividing it into both as well, I think two different terms, right? So there might be an Egypt-focused fund where some short-term goals are needed to happen, right? In terms of Egyptian employment, so on and so forth. But it's quite interesting to see this kind of funds emerging every now and then, and having that kind of LP commitments with this kind of amounts coming into the region, right?
For this question, it's kind of unusual, but bear with me, please. It's a longer question. In 2010, 2012, we had only a few VC firms and venture builders in MENA. Now, the number of VC firms in MENA, including accelerators, venture builders, corporate VCs, and family offices investing in tech, exceeds 350. And before I ask my question, I want you to look at this table. It's fascinating how these firms all started at almost the same time, back in 2010, 2012, but each took a different path. Sawarii Ventures focused on creating deal flow by starting Flat 6 Labs, an accelerator in almost all the main countries here. MENA, on the other hand, they focused on acquiring majority stakes in relatively bigger startups, and they helped them scale. It's like a holding model. Wamda decided to focus on non-mandated LP capital. And then MEVP and Beko Capital focus on the traditional VC model, raising from mandated capital or sovereign funds, corporate VCs, family offices, etc. And they followed a typical VC model in operating the funds as well. And they have different AUMs, different number of startups, different impact. What lessons can we draw from these different strategies? How should newer VCs in the region decide on their focus? Should they build, scale, or follow a traditional route? How can they stand out among the hundreds of new VC firms out there?
What do you mean by mandated versus non-mandated capital?
For example, SVC, if they invest in your VC fund, they have a mandate for you to invest in local or regional. Otherwise, you have the freedom to invest everywhere. Like, for example, Shuruk Capital, they invest in the region and outside the region. They invested in South Korea and multiple countries.
Well, I'll take a step. So I think on the LP-based side, so there's different ways different firms can operate, because I was there and I was in one of them. My view is like, there's no need for too much innovation on the kind of LP-based side in terms of who you raise from and how you raise from. I mean, keep it very simple, straight kind of VC structure. I mean, it's something to look at AUMs and number of startups, but what you really want to look at is performance, right? And by performance, I mean not TVPI, I mean like actual distribution and TVPI both. So I think when you look at that, I think it's still very early and nascent in the region, but if you take an honest look at like DPI and TVPI of those vintages 2013 onwards, I suspect the ones that did the less creative stuff with LP base, with chasing LP money with DFIs, actually have much better track record, or expanding geographies because there's money here versus money there. I suspect those are by far, those things can coincide. So it could be that you said SVC, you say, well, Saudi is the largest economy in the region, so it makes sense to kind of raise money from like with a mandate for Saudi, because if you have a regional focus, then you're going to do that. But to go back to the main point, I think it's if you keep it simple, you focus on great deployment and not chase AUM through funky stuff in terms of slicing and dicing what your structure looks like, your LP base looks like. I think you have that's easier. It's the job is simpler than the need to kind of do that. I don't have obviously knowledge of the returns or TPIs of all the funds, but I have a general sense, and I think it bears just eyeballing the portfolios of these firms. Like I kind of know who's doing really well and who is kind of not so well. So I suspect that that's it. That's how I see it. And the one thing I'll say about Wamda for my 8 years, 7, 8 years is we did really well by just on the fund where I was there, really just on being simple, keeping it simple, and we did well. And I think that's the same. I would say the same for Beko. I mean, they had a clear mission, especially in that first fund. I think Fund 1 and Fund 2 where it was pretty straightforward. It's just like, invest, not chasing AUM, but chasing good deals and go from there.
Yeah. So Michael, maybe I'll add to the same question, but I'll add, what's the measure of success over long term? Like we're talking about 10 to 15 years for these firms. Is it the size of the AUM, the returns to LPs, the impact they're doing, how many companies they invested in or seeded? What do you think on the long term, the main success factor is?
Yeah, and I wanted to add one small point to Khaled's point, and then I'll get to answering your question. The one thing I've learned over the past decades is a lot of the DNA of the funds are really driven by the first GPs and how they kind of view the world and their background and their history. I've noticed, globally, you can just see the DNA of a firm and how they operate and the types of LPs they work with is often very tightly linked to the original GPs or the founding partners of those firms, and that often kind of determines the more kind of long-term trajectory. Sometimes the funds are just pure money managers, and then sometimes the funds are just more, kind of added value ecosystem builders, and sometimes it's a combination of both. But yeah, it's oftentimes very driven by the founding GPs. I think from a longer term view, and just doing this close to 20 years, I just have to fully agree with Khaled. Like, you have to keep it simple. Like in the end, our job is to invest in great companies and return capital. And I can't put it simpler than this. That's what we need to do. So if you're building a firm over decades and you want to be around for the next 20 years and build a legacy, you just have to return capital, and you can only do that by investing in amazing deals. The one thing I would add, though, is what I think is different for us in regions such as MENA and Asia is that the managers are slightly more hands-on to drive those returns. We don't have the luxury of just investing in a good deal, sitting back and just waiting for returns. Like some of the other markets, you have the ability to write a few really good checks and deals, sit back a little bit more and kind of see the returns coming. I think here we have to be slightly more hands-on. I remember in our second fund, 2015 vintage, where two M&A deals, we drove the entire M&A. So that oftentimes does happen, that you're just more involved as a manager. So kind of longer term success, I think, is driven by not AUM. I just don't believe in chasing AUM unless you just want to sit back, relax, and take management fee. But I just don't believe that's a long-term strategy. I think a long-term strategy is finding the right size fund for the right ecosystem and driving, just investing in good deals. And if it means that your fund only invests in 10 deals or 15 deals and you can drive return, that's amazing. If you need to invest in 50 deals, 50, and that's the way that you drive returns, that's amazing. But in the end, that's what we have to do. Return capital.
Yeah, on the fund size side, I remember a talk by Brad Feld from the Foundry Group. He said we have the same fund size every time. They had multiple funds, and each one of them is, I think, 223. Like he had a specific number. But yeah, so Nour, so far we have keep it simple. We have be hands-on, helping and adding value because of the nature of this emerging market. What do you think? How can newer VC firms stand out long term?
Yeah, I'll definitely double down on the keep it simple part, right? So we're also LPs in current funds, and we always speaking with GPs and making sure, like, you need to be a bit flexible, right, in these kind of emerging markets. And having mandated kind of LP capital really makes it quite difficult to be a bit flexible. And then it comes to a state where a VC really wants to, if they want to build their own deal flow, or they want to do these kind of investments, right? And which can be a bit more pricier than building your own, right? So I think it's just being simple is quite it, right? So just something to add on is that a lot of these mandated funds end up ruining certain kind of markets, and I'll be very open, right? To kind of overflowing capital in certain kind of markets and quite increased valuation of capital. So I think that's the only downside with mandated capital.
Yeah, let's say with mandated capital. I've heard from some VCs, saying that if you have a mandate, this can affect the performance of the fund long term, because you have to only invest in a specific region. So you're not incentivized only by the financial returns, but there are other impact factors that you should consider. But this on the long term might affect your own reputation as a VC when it comes to you raising second, third, fourth funds. Michael, I want to ask you, in Saudi, we know that SVC encourages all of the funds they invest in to invest locally and regionally. But you're based in Qatar now, you have an office in Qatar. And it seems to me, I'm just an outsider looking into the country. It seems to me that Qatar has a different approach. They're investing in global VC firms coming into the region, while in Saudi, they're investing in local VC firms. Can you tell us more about what's happening in Qatar and what's the differences you see between those two countries?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. It almost kind of takes me back when kind of Singapore Inc. started to invest in local managers. When this is kind of back in 2014. So when Temasek kind of ran their first program to invest in managers, they had a mix of, I would say, kind of local and international VCs that they were backing. Not necessarily with the mandate to only invest in Singapore, but kind of to be, regional and active in the region. I think Qatar is taking a similar approach, where they tend to not only, but including international VCs as well. So what you're seeing now in Qatar is that a lot of the funds, Europe, US, but also regional funds that are speaking to the sovereign about, hey, what can we do here from a Qatari context? I'm not sure what the mandate will fully end up looking like. I can imagine it's going to be a hybrid between investing in the region and investing locally, or adding to the Qatar ecosystem, where you kind of want to see more pipeline, more deal flow coming from Qatar. I don't think that the ink is dry yet on this. They're kind of still sort of looking at different strategies. Yeah, but to your point, it's a very international focused mandate. So you'll see a lot of international managers. The idea indeed is to really drive FDI and have managers from different geos, Asia, US, Europe, and MENA, find either a home, a subsidiary, or like an outlet within Qatar under QFC.
I think we can talk about VC funds and geek out on VC funds for all day long. But Jamie, please take us to another news about a startup now.
Yeah, well, we can geek out about venture debt now, maybe. So maybe not quite departure.
Okay.
you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I keep asking about VC funds and their model more than startups. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So let's go to Abbey. So they've raised secured 50 million in credit financing from Shrewd Partners and Amplified Growth Partnership, which is of course a collaboration between Nuwa Capital and Ajij Capital. So it'd be interesting to get Khaled's perspective on that as well, if we can. So they've secured this financing to scale its operations and expand its earned wage access services across the MENA region. I suppose on the venture debt side of things, obviously Shrewd and Amplified Growth Partnership, they launched 100 million venture debt funds relatively recently. I think Shrewd was back in May. Amplified Growth was last month, I think. So they work closely together to structure this particular deal. In terms of Abbey, founded in Pakistan back in 2021. I think it was YC backed as well, open to correction on that, but I believe it was. So it focuses on, so it's fintech, focuses on financial inclusion for employees and SMEs. So I guess in terms of earned wage access, also referred to as on-demand pay, instant pay, earned income, plenty of different ways of phrasing it. Essentially tackle a sort of financial stress, I suppose, so enables employees to meet their financial obligations without exposure to debt traps. So in terms of, I guess, their success to date, it's reached more than 750,000 people. They've partnered with over 550 companies as well. And I suppose in the UAE context, they facilitated, I think, somewhere in the region about 55 million in earned wage access. It's about 545,000 transactions as well. So Khaled, over to you. Why venture debt? Why Amplified Growth Partnership?
So first, we did the partnership because I think we really believe in the fact that there's need for diversification in the capital stack. It's unusual for a VC firm, I think, globally to kind of get into it, which is why we didn't do it ourselves. And in matter of fact, we co-own the GP, but we're really the advisor. Ajij is the manager. So Ajij really kind of manages the asset. We're not we don't do the deals. We don't, we have a seat at the table to advise, but we're not kind of managing it. And that's by design, because we're, the DNA of our firm is a VC firm, is really traditional kind of venture capital. But we saw an opportunity here, and we really like the Ajish guys. They come from a totally different perspective, and we've known them for a little while, and we've gotten for a long while actually, and we thought there was an opportunity to tackle something together here, where they're kind of pushing it, where we're more on the kind of advisory side, but to help build out the wider ecosystem opportunity. The fact that, venture debt aside, there's like a huge gap in private credit generally across the board, right? Like, I mean, there's a huge gap in credit. Like, if you're a small business in the GCC or MENA widely, it's not easy to get credit, right? It remains like a massively and I'm not talking about tech, I mean like just anything. So it remains like a massively undercapitalized segment of of asset classes. It's hard. Even bank debt's very hard here, right? The thinking was to help promote the ecosystem and build that out. What we liked, what the Amplify team liked about EBHI was really about the fact that it's somewhat asset backed, it's earned wage, so there's very little risk on the downside. It's a very kind of easy structure. The EBHI guys have done a really good job of coming to the GCC, which is kind of where this is mostly focused. So we like that type of transaction where it's relatively low risk, you get a reasonable coupon, and you help kind of accelerate the development of these types of models. This kind of, I don't know what you call it, on lending, I think they call it, where you're kind of lending on top of a platform, but that's quasi asset backed or somewhat asset backed. So that's we like that, and I think was why I kind of proceeded with it.
So Khaled, I want to stay with you. So similar to our conversations on the sovereign funds bringing in international players or focusing on local players, this one is a bit different because traditionally we've seen local VCs investing local copies of those successful models globally.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're seeing people investing in the original ones and bringing them to the region, the startups. What do you think? Is this good, bad? How will this reflect on the local scene?
You mean in investing in global businesses and then bringing them here? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Instead of investing in their local copies.
I mean, obviously, I have a vested interest here, so I would say to the allocators and it's like, I mean, you don't really, and I've been kind of saying this for years and years and years. It's like you don't really need to bring 80-90% of the time for consumer internet. Let's call it consumer internet in that segment. You really don't need to bring anything locally. There's nothing. I mean, everything is replicable, and actually, the replica, to use a dirty word, is replicas, like founders don't like that word, but like the replica or the clone or whatever you want to call it, is usually actually better than the global one at adapting. And I always give the Kareem example as why it functions better than the function much better, adapted much faster to the requirements of the local market. And I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole. Same with Souq before it. There's a reason why the food delivery businesses that are local are the ones that win. I know we're talking about Talabat later, but Jahiz, Hunger Station, Talabat, far more effective than their global peers, right? Because they're locally adapted. I mean, and you saw how Uber Eats exited the market here. So I think in the realm of consumer internet writ large, 80% of the time, to give a number, I think the local player is better suited to tackling the problem. There is, especially outside of consumer internet, when you're looking at things that are inaccessible in MENA, like deep tech and things like that, there is a very good case to invest globally and locate here, because there's big elements of the infrastructure that are missing for that, whether that's big R&D universities that spurn out research that can be commercialized, or other kind of talent that you just don't have here. There is a case for that, but I think in the consumer internet space generally, I don't really see the need, most of the time. But there is a good case when and deep tech is one example. There are many other examples where there is a sort of impediment to developing it locally easily. Whereas it actually can be really bad if you try to develop it locally without all the infrastructure around, and you can end up like throwing a lot of money down the drain. So anyway, that's my kind of long meandering answer.
That's good. Michael, Nour, what do you think?
I mean, I can speak from an Asia perspective, because of course we speak to our portfolio quite regularly about this. And it's true, like if you are looking at a generic payments gateway that sits in Malaysia, I wouldn't necessarily encourage them to expand here, but because how are you going to compete with the local incumbents and sort of the local startups that have a way better grasp of the market, have built partnerships with financial institutions, and you're going to have to kind of reinvent the entire wheel. That's money not well spent, I think. For me, it only makes sense when there is a genuine commercial viable reason to do so, which could be like a partnership, or it could be something unique that you have. So we've invested in a space technology company, and they're speaking with some of the governments in the region, because what they've built is just not here yet. And it's not even in other markets, so that makes a lot of sense. But to have something that is here already fairly well institutionalized and to bring it from another country here just doesn't make any sense to me. So we encourage our portfolio to really look at, is there any differentiation which makes sense as you are looking at expansion? But yeah, there are a few cases where business models make sense. So from our Asia portfolio, I think we have about, so out of the like 107, 108 companies, we have about 9 companies that are in the region, but they did so on their own and they had commercial reasons for it. So for instance, for one company, they use it as a hub to expand to Africa. So they sit in Dubai, and that made a lot of sense for them. But they're like a Series D company, highly profitable. So for them, it wasn't kind of an easy decision to make. So then, yeah, in those cases, it definitely makes sense.
Just to qualify what I was saying also, I mean, there is natural way companies grow and cross borders, and that's totally fine. And I'm all for that. Like, I'm really just saying about when an investor, and typically it's a sovereign or someone, or not necessarily a sovereign, but somebody who thinks, who will say, look, I found this great company in Silicon Valley that I'm going to invest in, I'm going to bring to the region, and there are already like 4 clones here. Why? Just invest in the local clone. To be fair, that's changing rapidly. So there's a lot less of that than there used to be. So it used to be, that was the norm, that whoever was interested in the asset class, that was the normal way they would do it. But I think that's really changing. But yeah, I'm not prejudicing against companies naturally expanding. That's normal. That's totally normal, expanding borders slowly. I think it's when it's like this sort of, on the investor side, trying to kind of engineer market entry and stuff like that.
Yeah, if you take my money, you have to expand to my region. That's enforced. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing is, and this was one thing we learned rapidly, kind of expanding here and moving here, is that you'll still have a significant amount of founders that assume that if you do the fundraising story, I'll raise from you and then I'll move here. I think that is finally out the window, because I just don't believe that works, and that is not the motivation that you need. But I like the organic cross-border expansion. I think that makes a lot of sense, but doing sort of the tit for tat where you invest and I'll move over, I just don't believe that is the way to go.
Nour.
Yeah, I would just want to add that I just see it in a way of people expanding from abroad and coming within our local markets. I think it's, as Michael said, I think in certain sectors, I don't think there's any logical sense in it. But I fairly believe that in certain industries, it's needed to increase more competition without that environment, right? Like you've seen this kind of transitions happen, for example, in the space of Jahiz or Talabat or like, and I think that's really going to shift the market in a more competitive way, which at the end of the day would make more sense for the end user and consumer, right? So that's the only way I see it where it's beneficial.
I know we spend more time on this one, but I have one last question on this. The blended finance model. We've seen a few VC firms here doing this blended finance model. I know, Khaled, you touched on you and Ajij joint venture to invest in a debt fund. But we've seen, for example, Shuruk invests in equity and debt. And there are some others in the market that are doing this blended financing. What do you think of this model, and would it work in the region given their LPAs?
I mean, for me, that's the reason why we did it through a partner, and the partner is the manager, is because I think it just gets really messy when you're trying to do too much at the same time. And there's no skill set within the firm to do it, our firm. So as Nuwa, we always want to just be a, primarily early stage to kind of, a VC, I guess, generally, we'll invest in equity and follow from early through to probably Series B and around that. That's our kind of what we know. The counter to this argument is the region is so nascent in terms of and the availability of capital that there is, I think, a big opportunity to build a asset manager that has a new model around the innovation economy that's multi-asset, etc. So there is room for that. It's just a question of how you do it and when you do it and how quickly. Part of the problem is we're all small. I mean, everybody's subscale. Like, nobody's large. I mean, I think you had a table before. Becca's 400 million AUM, give or take. It's small, right? It's not big. Same with other players in the space. So I think running, and we, to be fair, I tried to do this a little bit a year ago, I want to say. Like, try to run before you can walk. It's just like do too much at the same time and do too many kind of products and offerings. And you kind of get a bit lost in it all. And then I think much more focused on, for me personally, on like one step at a time and then go there. But growing the firm, you have to kind of think about how to get there. So in the long term, I think it's worth building multi-product kind of approach. It's just how you do it, in what way, where it doesn't kind of just turns out to be a massive distraction and conflict. It creates like massive internal. I mean, debt and equity by definition is a conflict, right?
Michael, have you seen that in Asia?
Yeah, I think as managers, you always have the internal discussion about what is our strategy going to be and how are we going to grow the firm, and are we going to grow the firm that doing multiple products, or are we going to stick to kind of one product in one asset class and move forward there. There's different trains of thoughts. I'm a bit older, so I tend to.
You're not that old.
I'm almost 50, so I can say that I'm very old. I'd say that I truly believe in kind of, to our earlier point, is keeping it very simple and straightforward, because one is it just doesn't get messy in terms of conflicts of interest. Like how do you as a manager manage this entirely different asset class? So my preference has always been to keep it relatively simple and straightforward. What I've seen in Asia is we've gone through this cycle where VC funds back in the day used to be VC funds. Now they become kind of semi-private equity funds. The concern I always have is you grow your AUM, you grow your team, all of a sudden you're just like this entirely different beast. And not every manager that started out as a VC is an amazing mid-market growth manager as well, or is an amazing manager in the credit space. So I think you have to be very careful in how you structure your teams that handle all of these different asset classes. What we've seen in Asia is that there's a clear division between the equity funds, the venture funds, the mid-market private equity funds, and the credit funds. So recently, HSBC, I think they've done 3 deals, Caro, Ninja Van, and there might be another one, where they provided them with a significant amount of credit. I couldn't imagine as a shareholder that credit would come from our firm. That just would not be the right signal, because there's an obvious sort of conflict there. So it's more separated in the Asia context. But that being said, we also have some very mature venture debt funds. So for founders, they have a menu. They can pick and choose on the venture debt side. Venture debt or credit works. There tends to work that it's usually combined with an equity round, and then the debt provider would ask who's leading the round. If it's from a kind of sanitized, curated list, you would get the credit based on the reputation of the managers that are on your cap table.
It seems there is a revolution of financing products in MENA nowadays. We have the EWA services, revenue-based financing, invoice factoring, buy now, pay later, rent now, pay later. And now we have procure now, pay later. Jimmy, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, it's an insert synonym for transfer of ownership, pay later world. We're all just living in it. So yeah, Saudi fintech, so Mala, they've raised 7 million in a pre-seed. So that was led by Venture Souk. Round was also joined by everyone else, it seems. Beko Capital, M Capital, Access Bridge Ventures, Palm Ventures, Sharouk, Wad Investments, and D Global Ventures. So Mala was founded earlier this year by Musab Kami, so one of the most active angel investors in the region. So over 100 investments in recent years, some startups including Nearpay, Saura, also an LP, believe in Amir Farah's Coty Ventures. Previously he was a general partner at Venture Souk's fintech fund. He just stepped back from that role this month, so he's now going to serve as a venture partner there. Moving forward, in terms of what Mala are doing, they're building a buy now, pay later for businesses, allowing them to pure goods and defer payment. So it's going to offer 30 and 60-day payment terms, support purchases across all channels, online, over the phone, and in store. Obviously, the rationale being that suppliers in Saudi often, I guess, face obstacles in terms of offering credit to businesses because, traditional methods would rely on relationships rather than through risk assessment. The whole point of Mala is that they're going to address, I guess, this hiccup through technology and big data to ensure suppliers are paid in time. So they haven't launched yet. I believe the plan is to launch in Q4, so somewhere in the next 2 months or so. But yeah, Musab making the shift from VC to founder.
I want to talk about Musab and this big pre-seed round. But before that, all these services are debt-based, kind of competing with banks, right? What's happening in MENA now? Why the influx of all those new financing services to startups in only 2 years? Nour, what do you think is happening?
It's quite a growing financing mechanism, right? You've seen that in certain companies. And I think certain business models, certain startups itself, it would only financially work through debt facilities. I mean, I've seen a couple of pitfalls where some kind of companies start up raising and they double down on just raising equity and safe notes. But at the end of the day, they end up being so diluted that they would have wished to could have started with a debt facility right in the get-go. I mean, what they're doing here is quite impressive, to be honest. I mean, quite a huge pre-seed round, not the usual. So yeah, I'm just quite interested. I would be happy to know more about it. I mean, there's quite a couple of VCs, right, participating at such an early stage, right, gives a lot of confidence in the business model or how it works. So yeah, quite impressive.
Not just a couple, 8 VC firms.
Yeah.
And VC firms, we're not talking angel investors, 8 VC firms participating in a 7 million, not seed, pre-seed round in Saudi. And I know Musab is a very seasoned founder. Congrats on raising such a big pre-seed round. But I have to ask, this is not common, right? Any comments and reactions on the size of the round and the participants in this pre-seed round?
Well, I got 2 things. I think why you're seeing so many of these models to your earlier question is because I think I alluded to it earlier. This is such an underbanked economy relative to its development and size, particularly in the GCC and even in the less developed part of the Middle East, like Jordan or Egypt. It's just so underbanked. It's just so all of these kind of fintech players have a real shot. And I disagree with some of it. Like, I'm not a fan of RNPL, but I could be totally wrong. But I think the broader scope is that there is in traditional financial services, they're leaving so much money on the table by just being, frankly, like a bit slow and lazy because they traditionally make money through giving financial services to GREs and like large institutions, leaving everyone outside of that just don't need to worry about them, that there's so much more room for all of these players. I mean, BNPL, let's take BNPL, for example. Like between Tabi and Tamara, they're probably some of the most profitable or effective BNPL players on the planet, right? Like by far, if you forget Klarna, just like they do much better, and the reason is because they're instead of lending to subprime borrowers that have their credit cards maxed or whatever in places like where in the more developed markets, they're basically lending to prime lenders, to prime borrowers who don't have access to a credit card or don't use their credit card for whatever reason, or because the banks just don't care. So that there's huge room to kind of really revolutionize financial services. And I'm sorry to say the banks just, they're making so much money anyway, and the traditional financial institutions are making so much money anyway, that it doesn't matter. They're willing to kind of to leave that on the table. And that's what we're seeing. I think that's exactly why you see all of these models kind of evolving. This is just on the lending side. I mean, let alone everything else. Like there's infrastructure, there's wealth tech, on managing, savings and stuff like that. That's a whole other universe that's just ignored by what in other parts of the world, even in other emerging markets, there are traditional financial institutions that deal with it. So it creates a lot more space for these startups. Why this round is so big? I think because Mus'ab is a, very, very well-known commodity. You'll notice a lot of the VCs in there are ones he worked with or is an LP in or has been related to his previous ventures. So there is that kind of immediate network. So people know him very directly, clearly. That's why you see you see all these people participating. Large rounds, I think primarily to use some of the equity, to Nour's point, to validate the model and then go to debt. I mean, that's, I'm guessing now, but for him, that's what you do. You use some of the equity to validate the model and then immediately go to getting more favorable debt terms to be able to scale the product.
I do not know all the ins and outs of this deal, but I've of course read up on it. Maybe the one thing I would add from what we've learned in Asia is when these rounds get this sizable this early, it's all about discipline. And what I've seen, I'll give Indonesia as an example. Like between 2015 to 2018, the capital poured into all the fintech companies in the Indonesian context. If you fast forward to now, some of them are not doing well at all for a number of reasons. But I think discipline is very important. Like the fact that you have, put together like an amazing cap table. There's plenty of capital in the company doesn't necessarily mean that's the recipe for success. So what is going to be very important now is as this company is progressing, and I agree with Khaled's point in terms of there is so much left to be done from an infrastructure standpoint, but it was similar in Asia. If you look at markets like Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, similarly, there was a massive gap from an infrastructure standpoint on the fintech side. But what you get is there's a lot of money then all of a sudden going in, and then people lose their discipline because they kind of assume that the opportunity will present itself and it will kind of almost execute itself as long as you pour enough money into it. That is not true. You still need a massive amount of discipline and focus and the right people and the right partnerships to eventually make this work. So I would say I see the opportunity clearly, but with these larger rounds, my concern is always around maintaining enough discipline over the long term.
So Michael, you mentioned in Asia, they focused a lot on fintech. I see that now here in MENA. The sexiest vertical in MENA is now fintech. What happened later on in Asia? What's the next big thing for them?
Well, obviously, and I sincerely hate saying this, but yeah, there's obviously a lot of AI companies. Here we go.
Okay.
So that is something that has picked up. But a few interesting ones though. So on the predictive healthcare side, there's some interesting companies that are now popping up, which gets me excited. I think quantum is taking a really forward leap. There's a lot of talent that is in Singapore that has been there for like a longer time, that are working with universities, with the scientific institutions. So we'll see more on the quantum computing side coming out as well. Communication and data centers. So Malaysia is building a massive data center, which brings a lot of opportunities on making data centers more efficient. There's the big energy component, so we're seeing some startups around that as well. So I'm seeing some good diversification in terms of the types of companies we're seeing there.
Amazing. Nour, reactions on this round, on the model?
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's quite a notable round, right? 8 VC investors, quite the credibility. I mean, I don't personally know the founder. I've checked around his LinkedIn, quite an active investor. But yeah, I think just revolving back on that point is that having such a big pre-seed round, there's a lot of eyes on you. You have to deliver. So I think that's mainly one thing they would be noticeable about, right?
Ahmed, before I know you're about to finish up, just on obviously the investor making the switch to founder. Have any of you ever flirted with the other side or thought about making a switch? Ever been tempted?
All the time. All the time. Yeah, it's much more fun. I think I can see, but I'd be terrible at it. But like, yeah,
Don't say
all the
that.
time. It'd be fun. No, I'm a bit scatterbrained. I think you need to be quite operationally. Oh, it depends on the business, I suppose. But
What
I
areas were
think
you
you need
thinking
to.
about?
So I almost did, and I think she'll be okay with me saying the story. I don't know if you know Lana Ghanem from Hikma Ventures. So Hikma, so Lana, so she was at HBS. I hadn't joined WAMDA yet. I think I was at 254 running that fund. And we almost did a very similar to what Musab is doing now. But it was gonna have multiple lending options. So it was sort of like a mixture of Lendo and Raqamiyya. So alternative lending platform for businesses, but asset backed. So invoice factoring would be part of that. But also then financing, payments. So like it was going to look something like that. And then we never did it. I think we just we worked a lot on it, and then we never just pulled the trigger. It would have been, I think, a bit premature anyway. I think it would be, but who knows?
I did quite the opposite. I was a founding team member of a YC back startup back in the day, and then I was like, okay, there's a lot of stuff in the investment space that I'm missing out. So did that kind of switch.
Was this
but it's quite interesting.
Elevate? Was this Elevate? Nour?
Yes,
Was
yes,
it?
yes,
Yeah.
it was. Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah, come from the other side as well. So what used to be an operator, used to be a founder, turned investor. I think I'm better at being invested than being a founder. Although we managed to get an exit for the company. It was a fairly decent one. We used to run a smaller data center. I loved that space in Europe. So exited in 2007. So it's a while ago. What I did like about being a founder is like just the technicality and just being in the weeds of building something. That remains pretty cool.
Jamie, let me ask you that question.
Oh, jeez. What's the question?
Did you start a company? Did you think about starting a company or starting a VC fund or moving from one side to the other of the table?
Yeah, I think I'm a generalist. So I think the struggle for me is sticking to one thing for any lengthy period of time and not getting bored or overly self-critical. So I think I've too many fingers in too many different pies. I'm running out of hands at this juncture. But I guess VCpreneur fulfills that to a certain extent. We had our 1 year anniversary this week, which was great. So the fact that that's been going for a year is good. And so, yeah, onwards and upwards as far as that's concerned. We'll see what happens over the next trip around the sun.
Okay, great. Very exciting. What's the next story? And I hear it's about an IPO on the horizon.
Yeah, an IPO. We haven't had many of those of late, but yeah. So Dubizzle, looking like this is going to take place in 2025, I believe. So basically, the news on this front is just that Dubizzle, they've appointed Emirates NBD, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, and Morgan Stanley to lead that IPO. Currently, they're looking at a valuation of somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion, I guess, in terms of the background. It's a pretty interesting background, actually, with Dubizzle. So it started back in 2005 by two US expats, Sim Watley and JC Butler. So it was set up with, I think, like $6,000 of savings from each of them. And it's kind of had a circuitous path at this point. They departed in 2013. It was acquired by Naspers, South Africa-based investment company, to their subsidiary, OLX Group. That was in 2019 for 190 million. Then there was a merger between EMPG, who have Bayoush, the large classifieds for properties, and Dubizzle Group. It was rebranded Dubizzle Group recently. And yeah, IPO now on the horizon for early next year. So I think there might be pip to it by Talabat, though, obviously in Q4 of this year. So they won't be the first tech company, I believe, to IPO. To just narrowly miss out.
On Talabat, I don't know who's seen the prospectus, but it is It is pretty amazing. I can't give the
insane.
details, unfortunately, but like it is an incredible company. Wow. And this excludes Saudi. This is just the carve out, excluding the hunger station. I mean, this must be the most profitable delivery business on the planet. It must be. I mean, just there's no other way. And the growth is phenomenal. So I think like a testament, I'm really excited once this goes public, because I think it's a testament to what the power of building businesses here means. And you can build really big, profitable businesses in really interesting ways. Only caveat I'll say is DFM seems like I don't know, DFM is not the best exchange in the region. I mean, they're trying to kind of diversify, but it's not that liquid. So I hope they don't get they don't get punished because of lack of liquidity and stuff like that. But otherwise, I think what a business, what a crazy business. Really, really.
So both of them are getting listed on DFM, on Dubai Financial Market?
I think Talabat, I'm not sure about Dubizzle. I imagine.
I think it is. Yeah, to the best of my knowledge. But yeah, Talabat's insane. I mean, they're looking at what, 12 to 15 billion dollar valuation, more than the actual parent company, Delivery Hero. It's insane.
So Khaled, before you go, how do you think the market would react to this? I mean, we've seen good success stories in Saudi stock market with Jahez and Rasan, but kind of underwhelming IPOs for the Nasdaq SPAC path that I think Swivel and Ngami took early 2022. What do you think these two, the market would react to these two?
I mean, I've seen both. I think particularly for Talabat and Dubizzle, to be fair, is quite, but Talabat is just an extraordinary, the numbers are extraordinary. I mean, once you see them, so it should be good. I think the only issue is the exchange they're listing on, not the underlying business. You know, Swivel and Rami, I mean, those are small businesses. I mean, they're not. I mean, they're great. I mean, I have for Rami, I feel I have all the respect in the world for building like a great business, but I think there's a mismatch on valuation. Really, was the issue. It's not a factor of business. Swivel, I think clearly the SPAC was like a massive mismatch on valuation. And the underlying business fundamentals just weren't there. And Rami, the fundamentals were there. It's clearly like what the business does. It's very clear, and it worked. But Swivel was still figuring out and just way premature to get like public market scrutiny through a SPAC, and the valuations was just like, I don't know how to explain, like within the realms of fantasy in terms of the mismatch of what the size of the business is, and then what the SPAC listing price was. So I think that was the problem. With Talabat, it's not. I think it's the inverse. Talabat, and to a lesser extent Dubizzle, fundamentals incredible. Not sure about the exchange, but let's see.
Okay, Michael, Nour, reactions on the IPO news.
A quick one. I would say the news is good because it's helpful. It's going to. I mean, the region already has a lot of, I say, inbound interest from financial markets, but this will kind of emphasize and impact it a bit more positively. I do agree with Khaled though. So like IPOs only make sense if the company is able to continue to raise by being a public company and getting enough interest from both retail and institutional capital. The concern is always if you are at a less liquid exchange, that even if the IPO is a success, the story after is going to be very, very challenging and difficult. And I'm wondering if that's going to put the company into a position where it's going to be harder to fundraise. They're going to be looking at different instruments because of it. And we, again, similar experience we've seen in Indonesia, where companies have listed on the IDX, on the local Indonesian exchange, where although it's a good exchange, all the bulge bracket banks were involved in those listings. Eventually, liquidity became a larger issue. So I'm hoping they're able to solve for that, because to me, the day of the IPO is like one milestone, but it's way more important what happens afterwards. And then there's the liquidity for the investors, right? Like what does it look like after lockup? Are investors they'll see the successful returns which they're going to be reinvesting. So there's so much impacted around this story. But I'm positive in the sense that it's a great brand. It's a brand that people recognize, and that's going to be very, very helpful in their journey and in their listing.
Nour?
I think just relating back to both Michael's and Khaled's points, I think it's very good for the ecosystem or the region that we're in to see more tech IPOs coming out and so on and so forth. But I think we tend to forget most of the time the clear path to sustainability right after that, right? And I think the most overhyped kind of prices that come to that. So I think it's ensuring that due business IPO pricing, aligns with the current performance and have some future perspectives to avoid investor disappointment. Because we're incentivizing to see more IPOs coming up, but we would rather incentivize more on having more sustainable paths to maintain these kind of IPOs.
Yeah, especially with the gap with the valuation. They said from 500 million to 1 billion. That's a big gap, like double the price. So it's worrying me.
Spot on.
Okay, great. Well, with that, thank you so much, Nour, Michael, and Khaled, who had to leave us. And thank you, Jamie, as always, for all the news you're bringing us.
Not at all. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time.